Tell me, have you ever gambled in your life? Be honest. If you said no, you're more than likely a liar. But it's okay because you probably don't know that you're lying to me. We gamble every day in our lives, whether it be driving to work each day, taking a walk in the park, or even eating that 4-day leftover spaghetti sitting in the back of the fridge. Life is full of gambles, and at times it's easy to forget that we roll the dice each day. In the sense of physically rolling dice, what would be your answer then? Dice rolling games have been present throughout history for at least the last 5,000 years, transcending ancient cultures and persisting to the present day. This brings us to one of the most important dice roll games of all, Final Fantasy VI. Yes, we do have a casino shoved in our faces during the game, but FF6 is an experience that is one massive gamble. Now imagine you take that and multiply it by like 1,000, and that's where you come up with FF6 any% speedrunning. So let's dive into this game a chance by telling the story of its history and of those who completely broke Final Fantasy VI. The journey of FF6's any% category begins a lot earlier than most. Almost 17 years ago to this day, the SDA forums were brimming with activity for many platformers and popular games. While most JRPGs didn't have a speedrunning scene established due to the community being so niche and the runs being so long, the Final Fantasy series of games already had 2 segmented runs on the boards. Back in 2005, FF6's US release was beaten in 5 hours and 37 minutes on February 24th, and again in 5 hours and 26 minutes on May 5th by a runner named Peter Tiernan. While there wasn't a route explanation overall, the idea is to traverse through both the world of balance, recruiting characters to take on the Empire which threatens the land, and the world of ruin, reuniting the party after being separated, and defeating the main villain Kefka as quickly as possible. This includes leveling up characters to make them more powerful, managing money, and obtaining magic and equipment to clear a gauntlet of difficult bosses towards the end of the game. While these things were something to keep in mind for the segmented run, the single segment run required tons of refining to even stand a chance at taking this game down. An SDA forum thread was made for Final Fantasy VI in March of 2007 with some of the most iconic names in speedrunning at the time. RPG speedrunner Essentia 4 already completed a segmented run of Final Fantasy IX just before moving on to this one, combined with others assisting like Lucid Faya, who had a massive knowledge of RPGs in general, Inichi, a taster I covered in a previous video who has a track record of destroying games like Chrono Trigger, included with runners like Darkwing Duck, Carcinogen, and several others. There was a think tank dedicated to taking this game down. It would only take a few months of routing and attempts for Essentia to complete the game on July 24th, 2007 with a time of 5 hours and 11 minutes in today's timing, being the first mainline Final Fantasy game to have a single segment run completed. With this being the first ever run in one sitting, many different strategies were planned out in advance. However, the majority of the runs still relied on a game of chance, and who better to roll the dice than the gambling legend himself? Setzer has an ability called Slots which has several effects based on how the 3 icons are aligned. The main outcomes we want to look at are Joker Doom and Reverse Joker Doom. Joker Doom comes from getting 777s on the slots, and instantly kills all enemies in most situations. This is used on many fights in the game, but there are some bosses that are immune to this effect. This is where the Reverse Joker Doom trick shines. This exploit tricks the game into using the 777 bar Joker Doom on an enemy who is immune to the regular Joker Doom. This is done by having the slots queued up, muddling Setzer, and then removing the status effect before he casts his spell. This might seem complicated to set up, but you can see the effects in action here. A keen eye will notice the use of pausing to line up the proper icons. In the Super Nintendo and Super Famicom versions of the game, this can be used to consistently manipulate the slots for favorable outcomes such as these. In this example, the trick turns the impossible fight with Kefka into a brisk walk in the park. allowing him to be defeated fairly quickly. This strategy using Setzer would cover a staggering 2/3 of the speedrun, and it would be the centerpiece of FF6's any percent category for over half of a decade. However, it would take almost that long for the top time to be pushed down again after Essentia's initial run. While the age of VHS tapes was being traded for the era of capture cards and live streaming, the time commitment for such a long run was something people didn't take lightly. Many speedruns have a barrier to entry that is focused around precise tricks and perfect gameplay, but with the trade-off of the run being substantially shorter. RPG speedruns of this nature may not require extremely precise tricks, but the routing and time investment for full runs can be just as off-putting as a frame-perfect trick near the end of an unforgiving gauntlet. Over this time, the run would see some improvement. Essentia would bring her time down to a 4:57 on December 15th of 2012. This was also around when speedrunning became more popular on Twitch, allowing viewers to watch runners stream their attempts. This would cause the community to grow and attract more names to various games, and new challengers would attempt to take on FF6's lengthy gauntlet. Around 9 months after Essentia's record, a runner by the name of the LCC found his way into the FF6 speedrunning community and was quickly improving his times in the any percent category. On the 1-year anniversary of Essentia's record, LCC had brought his time down to just under a minute behind Essentia's run, and he knew he had the ability to compete with their time. Unfortunately, he needed to push through the game's RNG to get there. More on that later, but let's take a closer look at our runner. Right now, the LCC is just a name to you. He's the disembodied head of a simian from one of the biggest overlooked gems of the 1990s. However, if you look just beneath the surface of Data's face, you'll find one of speedrunning's most impressive resumes to date. LCC's exploits go back almost all the way to 2004, with Super Metroid, Mario Kart Time Trials, and Contra 3 on his belt. LCC had an incredible head start with the community, and it was only interrupted by a shift in interest to more professional level games like StarCraft. It would take nearly 8 years, but LCC would circle back to the speedrunning community, thanks to multiple GDQ showcases put on by runners like Spike Vegeta and Puexel. LCC had a lot he could bring to the table, and he did just that with his attempts. He would optimize some parts of the route to help bring his time down over the months, but as he got closer to his goal of a new record, these optimizations could only do so much in the face of unrelenting RNG. That wouldn't stop him from trying, because he was just inches away from the top time.
Okay. Not 455.
A 4:56.03 would be his final time on December 21st, 2013. While LCC was happy he overcame Essentia's record that stood for about a year, he wasn't exactly satisfied with the end time. With the rerouting he did, he expected to save a lot more time, but unfortunately that's one of the risks of running an RPG. Essentia dealt with this for months before getting her first single segment run finished, and the LCC noted particular instances where this would be the bane of his attempts. It still took a while to actually beat her time due to how easy it was to die in RNG elements like the River, Sabin Scenario, Fish, and Kefka Tower. From my perspective, it didn't feel like a better run, just a better route, and I still wasn't happy with it. It's hard to get excited over something you are 100% certain will happen. Luckily for LCC though, there would be a cure for the frustrating randomness that would end runs in an instant, and it wouldn't take long for the community to make this cure happen. Around this time in late 2014 and early 2015, communities were beginning to see more breakthroughs in learning how their games worked as a whole. Glitches and exploits went from the idea of, I don't know man, it just happens, to a complete methodical breakdown of nearly everything the game has to offer. FF6 would be the next game to open Pandora's box, and the discoveries born from this forbidden realm would seem to flow endlessly at the time. Wait a minute. I gotta fix a typo really quick, hold on folks. Sorry Setzer, but this artistic genius is going to lead the charge into the game's heavily glitched future. If you know everything there is to know about Final Fantasy VI, then you probably already know what's coming next. Like Setzer, Relm's unique ability allows the game to be completed much faster than normal, but unlike the previous strategies employed by our friendly dice roller, we need to go way outside her unique ability's intended use to unleash its full potential. Normally, Relm's sketch ability will let her paint an enemy in battle, and then use one of its attacks. In a perfect world, that's all it would do. But sometimes the ability can miss, and that's where things get a little bit weird. The sketch glitch is a phenomenon that has been observed all the way back to the 1990s, with internet users witnessing strange occurrences when using this ability under certain conditions. It wouldn't be until 2004, however, when whispers of this bug would surface in a comprehensive document created by FF6 enthusiast Master Zed. 2 months before the initial release of the documentation, on June 21st of 2004, Zed was able to track down the inner workings of the glitch and reveal what was previously considered an enigma to the community. This bug was discovered long ago, and yet if you tried to look up how it worked, all you could find for years was nothing but myths, rumors, and erroneous information. For being the most popular bug, no one seemed to know much about it. Zed would go on to describe the countless effects of the glitch, noting major changes in sprites, equipment, magic, and many more weird things. But this would only scratch the surface of the glitch's true nature. In January of 2014, the LCC started researching and testing encounter manipulation with specific encounters in the Veldt. In February, a French Xenogears runner by the name of Cabmoni found a new route to lock scenario, randomly saving 20 seconds despite previously not running the game. In March, runners Desirec and Gale gave information to LCC that would result in a manipulation breakthrough that made the entire game consistent. In April, LCC would use this route to obtain a 450-40, absolutely destroying any competition. And if that wasn't enough, in May 2014, the most important discovery of all would happen. Veteran speedrunner Brossentia, who had already made a name for himself in Final Fantasy IV, was doing some glitch hunting and routing in FF6 in May of 2014. He was known for pushing the fold in games he ran, taking concepts that other members of the community would bring up, and endlessly testing them until he found a good result. Brossentia was having conversations with someone from the tool-assisted speedrunning community, and use of the sketch glitch to warp into the late game came up in conversation. It's not known who exactly provided this information, but it was mentioned it would be a trick in an upcoming task. Brossentia took this information, and with the help of his Twitch chat, relentlessly tested scenarios until he was able to warp into the world of Ruin much earlier than intended. This, of course, took the community by storm, as many previously thought the sketch glitch was not useful for a speedrun. It was about this time that Gale went public that he was working on disassembling how the sketch glitch actually worked, and this was mostly thanks to the previous efforts of Master Zed. Over the next several months, efforts from many different runners would blossom into something incredible. A detailed breakdown of the sketch glitch and how to optimally use it would reach the light of day, and it would be the backbone of what's about to come next. Before that though, let's look at how this works in a technical sense. When a battle begins, the game creates a table in the RAM of what monster ID is in each monster slot. Sketch takes the monster slot that was targeted and looks for the sprite of the monster in the game's memory. It then copies the sprite in RAM and displays a flipped version on the screen. When Sketch misses, everything I just mentioned still executes, except for displaying the sprite. There's two instructions that load an enemy slot number and grab a monster ID by looking at a specific point containing the 16-bit integer ID of the monsters in battle. If the ability misses, the first instruction loads 0xFF instead of the enemy slot number I just mentioned. In simple terms, instead of getting the regular enemy slot data that's numbered 0 through 5, the game picks what would be slot 255, which falls under two 8-bit values in association with the first character's 28th spell in battle. These values are for if the spell can be cast or not, and the aiming information for said spell. Basically, this creates a huge problem. Now we're at the point where the sketch ability tries to draw a sprite from the incorrect information that was just attained. It's like Van Gogh trying to paint Starry Night with the blowtorch. It just doesn't work. Tiles for the sprite that's going to be built exist in memory as a single dimension, and the game uses a mapping to place tiles that build a two-dimensional sprite. It takes the ID of the monster we grabbed and stores it in an array which lets the game get the height and width of the enemy sprite. The way the game computes height is based off of the number of valid or non-zero tiles in the mapping. This is where our invalid monster ID comes into play. Since there are no valid tiles when the game counts it out, the value for this mapping array ends up being 0, and the height of the sprite will also be 0, at least in theory. When the game goes to copy the sprite from the ROM and into the RAM, the game decrements the height and checks if it's non-zero. If the height is 0 in the first place like we just mentioned, then the variable wraps around to 255. The game then thinks that the tile height of the sprite will be a massive 256. This may not seem like a big number to you, but the developers didn't plan for sprites to have a tile height bigger than 16. So yeah, you can kind of see the problem here. The cascade of functions that are derived from the incorrect monster ID render the game helpless, and allows the player to completely bend the software architecture to their will. Well, as long as the sketch ability missed. Missing with sketch can be pretty difficult on normal fights, so runners get the spell Vanish from the integer fight and use that on enemies to make them disappear. It's common sense that Relm can't paint something that is invisible, but I honestly didn't expect it from a game held together by duct tape and Gorilla Glue. During this time when Gale was researching the sketch glitch info, LCC was working with some test routes for the glitch based on Brosench's initial setups. The idea was to get a specific encounter out of a workable monster set, or mold from the game's encounter tables. These molds affected the outcome of the glitch, and LCC was looking for a fast setup that let him cast the spell Engulf. Engulf is the ability that the Zone Eater uses on Triangle Island in the World of Ruin. This is the fight where you let your party get sucked into the maw of the Titanic Beast, and you get a new character for your bravery. Since the only place in the game you're supposed to be engulfed is the Zone Eater fight, the effects of the entire party being engulfed remain the same. All you need to do is muddle the caster, and you've got a one-way ticket to Triangle Island in the World of Ruin. LCC would find some decent setups for this, but came across an issue where the game would freeze for a random amount of time after performing the sketch glitch, with times as little as 5 minutes and as high as 60 minutes. Not just that, but the method used to warp was basically a coin flip, meaning if it failed, trying again would waste a ton of time. As you could imagine, this was one of the reasons why many people said the sketch glitch wasn't viable in a speedrunning setting. This was quickly resolved by one of the pioneers of advanced RNG randomizers and ROM hacks, Abyssinum. He found a way to consistently bring this time down to about 3 minutes and 30 seconds, a much less frustrating amount of time to wait for the game to break. With this fix in hand, LCC would take on the game with the new glitch. There was still the gamble to worry about a few hours into the run, but it was more bearable thanks to keeping the time frozen in the sketch glitch down to a minimum. With this in mind, let's look at how the new strategies changed the any percent run overall. Basically, the idea was to go through the game until you recruited Relm, fight Intangier on Triangle Island to get Vanish, set up the sketch glitch on certain enemies to hopefully warp into the Zone Eater's cave and recruit Gogo, warp Stone back to the World of Balance and take on the floating continent before the second half of the game, then Death Warp back to the save point in the Zone Eater's cave where you can exit, and end back on the overworld as the airship due to another glitch. The only thing in the way would be Kefka's Tower and the final boss rush, but going into the dungeon without any way of mitigating encounters is a death sentence. So there's a quick detour to recruit Mog and grab the Moogle Charm, which prevents random encounters. LCC would begin his attempts using this route, and the results of these runs would be groundbreaking. I've said enough though. Take a look for yourself. On July 9th, 2014, LCC would get a 42634 after grinding out a much better warp from the sketch glitch. There were still many mishaps overall with the run, but since he got a fast warp to the World of Ruin, he wanted to put this mess of a category to rest, or at least until Cadmoni posted a video of his time. Wait, hold on a minute. In a random Twitter post from Cadmoni on July 16, 2014, he mentioned he was constructing a decent route with the sketch glitch without manipulation, and obtained a 4-hour, 21-minute, and 59-second run. This time, among other times he claimed to have achieved, never saw the light of day. While it's very likely that these runs actually did happen, based on his contributions with Gale during the work of the FF6 tasks, these unfortunately get filed under the lost media folder in speedrunning history. While these runs were happening, discoveries were still being pumped out at 100 miles an hour, or about 170 kilometers an hour if you're not using freedom units, and the previous methods of beating the game would quickly change. It was found that there were additional ways to influence how magic and items are replaced in the inventory after corrupting memory with the sketch glitch. There's a little more detail on how that works, but I want to jump ahead to another glitch that goes hand in hand with the sketch glitch. If done correctly, sketch can be used to manipulate items and spells into the inventory that wouldn't normally be there. This also extends to other weird effects that are adjacent to that, things such as flagging items as weapons or shields, flagging items as usable in a fight, and duplicating items by overriding its quantity. This can be done by inflicting and healing imp on a specific ally, healing their MP with specific items, or casting a specific spell that uses MP. This leads into another interesting find rediscovered by Rosentia. If a character has the goggles accessory equipped as a weapon, attacks, and the magic menu is opened at the same time, the menu will show items from the inventory if scrolled up or down. If the player uses one of these items, the character will cast magic whose ID corresponds to the ID of the item. Two notable ones are X Potion to cast Engulf, a spell which is used already, and Black Belt to cast Baba Breath, which removes a target from battle. With most enemies not being immune to Baba Breath, this removes most of the need for Joker Doom after a specific point in the game. Also during this time, another runner heavily involved in the tasking scene by the name of Catastrophe found a way to remove the need for using the Engulf spell to warp to the World of Ruin. This new warp could be done with a setup during the Antangier fight, skipping the need to obtain and use Engulf, Death Warp from the floating continent, and escape from the inner cave area where YuGiOh is recruited. The warp during the Antangier fight unfortunately did cause the game to freeze for a few minutes prior to getting control back, but this was still faster and much more consistent than the previous route. Shortly after these finds from Gale, Rosentia, and Catastrophe, LCC would take a stab at the new route featuring some of these newly implemented exploits. The very next month, on August 4th, 2014, we would see the implementation of the clever moves. Seriously, the idea of using Fumbaba's Baba Breath ability to remove enemies from battle is like some 200 IQ shit. But to be fair, so is the sketch glitch info dump, the routing over the last 7 years, and the collaboration of the community to beat the game in a few hours. It's all galactic brain strategy, but this one was the icing on the cake. All of these things coming together would nab the LCC a 4-hour and 16-minute run, 10 minutes faster than his record set just a month ago. This route removed the need to recruit Mog thanks to the sketch glitch used to generate 3 equipable Moogle charms and goggles, saving a sizable chunk of time. For the rest of the late game, the bosses in Kefka's tower are swiftly dispatched thanks to Joker Doom and Baba Breath. And a final fight with Kefka is a lot shorter than one would expect. An interesting note here, Baba Breathing Kefka would just cause the fight to move on to the next tier, but for some reason Baba Breathing one party character and killing the rest causes the battle to just end, triggering the game's final cutscenes. Back to the overall run though, LCC wasn't really satisfied with this time either. There were a lot of resets and mishaps due to not getting through several sketch glitch setups and late game bosses on the first try. This was okay, because LCC put a lot more time into practice rather than full game attempts. This would help refine some of his setups and allow him to work on mechanics such as getting the same frame attack item menu glitch more consistently. Over the next several months, LCC would keep pushing, and his efforts would not go unrewarded. On January 1st of 2015, LCC would solidify his place at the top of any % sketch glitch with an incredible time of 3:43.12, miles above those who were trying to complete runs using the complex tech. This result would be thanks to months of practice and perseverance in the face of these obscure glitches. and optimizing the route that was finalized back in August. The evolution of the run since the beginning of that year was one of the biggest events to happen in RPG speedrunning. Gale took Master Zed's information that was published a decade earlier and gave the community the tools to completely change what was possible with FF6 any%. Cadmoni helped with some findings and routing, Rosentia poured hours of trial and error into glitch strategies, Abyssinum and Catastrophe helped make runs more bearable, and the LCC drove all of this home in his attempts. This is something that I love seeing in these communities. The previous generation of glitch hunters and runners lay the groundwork for these amazing discoveries that happen years, if not decades down the line. While each advancement in how the game is ran appears to leave past contributors behind, each person who spent countless hours putting their all into the game is still part of the experience to this day. They will always be part of the infinite future that is the evolution of their community, and I think that's pretty damn cool. LCC would back off of FF6 at that point, wanting to focus on other speedrun projects that he had interest in. Other runners would make resources to help those interested take on the new frontier, but no one would come close to LCC's run with these strategies. Months would pass with no major events until about May of 2015. On May 21st of 2015, a Japanese RPG challenge runner by the name of Wonton03 posted a short clip showing the game freezing after dying 52 times in a row. It's hard to say why Wonton was doing something like this in the first place, but when the past declines to provide answers for someone's masochistic tendencies, I'd say those secrets are best left untouched. It wouldn't be long before this reached the tasking community, as renowned taster Pyohiko would share this just 9 days after the video was posted. Those familiar with the game were left astounded, so they decided to dive deeper into the find, and they were not disappointed with the results. I tested Celis, Edgar, Locke, Setzer, Terra, Relm, and Strego with each in a party of 2, and all I got was the same soft lock as above for Umaro. Cyan, however, caused the game to explode. He didn't think too much of it in his initial work, but the next day on May 31st, he had more results from his testing. I was able to get a number of crazy effects. A screen that said 4 and 4 groups, a save file selection screen that looped, the snow scene from the prologue, and a bunch of parts of the credits. The list went on, but one thing was clear. This was something that potentially made the game even more broken than with the sketch glitch. Catastrophe and Gale, with Cadmoni outside the forum thread, would look into this and make some very important discoveries over the next month. Basically, the game has a script language for scripted events, which contains things from music to graphical effects. Some of these events work similarly to how jumping to subroutines and returning to subroutines do in the assembly coding language. The simple idea is that once an event begins and is put into the associated stack, it'll eventually be removed by the event ending. Normally there's no issue with this, but something weird happens when a game over occurs. 2 events are added to the stack, and when the game over screen is cleared, only one of the events are removed. For those familiar with how stacks work, this can lead to some dangerous results. The game only ever has a max of 5 or so events on a stack, with the maximum not going much deeper than that. The game only clears the stack in specific situations, like entering a town, so if you keep getting the game over screen, eventually the event pointer is written to a different point in the game's memory. The result of this is one of the holy grails of glitch hunting: arbitrary code execution. There are several RAM addresses that are pointed to in this part of the game's memory, and these include things like the setup of the party, gold, game time, and many other things. So with a little bit of tweaking and computer magic, 52 deaths can call the event that triggers the credits sequence. So what would be the result of all these findings? Gale and Cadmoni would present a task to the community on August 6, 2015 that would blow any previous runs out of the water. A staggering improvement of 2.5 hours on the previous task with a time of 32 minutes and 54 seconds. It felt like the game only had a slight moment to breathe in the wake of the findings from the last year and a half, and the community was more excited about breaking the game than ever. This glitch train had no brakes, and not even a suplex was going to stop it. Not too long after the premiere of the task, Cadmoni would work on routing for a credits warp on console. It would take about 6 months, but after a ton of work and testing, he started sharing his findings with the community. At this point, there would be a new generation of runners who wanted to take on FF6's new any% category. The game was now short enough to justify multiple attempts, and the barrier to entry for completing a run was lower than ever thanks to these findings. In February of 2016, live runs of the game would be changed forever by one of these newer runners, starting with our martial arts master himself, the Sabin. The setup from Cadmony had many important aspects to it, but one of the main things involved with the credits warp was a specific RAM value associated with different window colors. Final Fantasy VI's menu has 8 overall window types with 7 subsettings to go with each. Every one of these subsettings has R, G, and B levels that can be changed. As you could imagine, there's a lot of variance that can happen with this part of the game's RAM. If all the window settings are set to specific values, then the player can warp the desired events based on what they wrote in memory. All runners had to do was get to the point in the game where they fought Vargas and recruited Sabin, get weakened to near death, change up the windows, and die 52 times in the overworld.
Here we go. Your guys got your 52. It's done.
Sabin's 5523 on February 27th, 2016 would be just the beginning of this monumental chapter in FF6's speedrunning history, as more runners would take on this short and much more accessible category.
Oh my god, world fucking record. I lost 40 seconds to that chain of bullshit attacks. Wow. But hey, world record, yo.
All of these runners pushed the game to its limit, with slightly more optimized routes and better execution with each new record. They slowly inched to what would seem to be the last major barrier in the true 80% category, but only one would reach that threshold first.
There it is.
Another runner by the name of Couch23 came in just ahead of Velociraptor 42 and snagged the first ever sub 50-minute run in a real-time setting. Couch already had competitive times in other RPGs like Final Fantasy IV, so it was natural to see him work his way to the top there as well. Since we're getting close to the end of our journey, I'll give a little spoiler. No one would go for the record as it stood at the time. The 4-party method would be the go-to consistent strategy for the 52 death credits warp, and the only thing in the world that was faster would be the final version of the game-ending glitch task completed in 24 minutes and 33 seconds earlier in 2017. Both this task and the previous one used a method to end up with only Terra in the party, and does the death warp around Figaro Castle. This was clearly much faster than doing the warp after fighting Vargas, and had the benefit of less menuing to change the window colors that affected the glitch. The only problem was that the trick requires a frame-perfect confirmation by holding A, X, Start, and R on the Game Over screen to warp into the credits. Much more difficult than doing the consistent setup for later in the run. So the idea was to play for 30 odd minutes, and if you missed the glitch, that was it. There was a lot of skepticism about the reliability of this in an RTA setting, as frame-perfect tricks can be difficult to manage. However, with many other games in the speedrunning community featuring tricks that come down to 1/60th of a second to execute, this just seemed to be another drop in the ocean. At the end of the day, no one tried this method because a one-shot attempt like that didn't seem to be viable. That is until February of 2018. A Japanese runner by the name of Eddie managed to perform this in a real-time setting after some trial and error. This run was performed on the Japanese Wii U Virtual Console version, as that was the only version of the game that could reproduce the same results as the task. He would demolish the previous record with a 31-minute and 32-second run. As of this day, this would be the fastest time that FF6 would ever be completed in. There are a total of only 3 runners to have done this method of the glitch, betting it all on a single frame that would win them the code execution lottery. It's actually kind of funny to think about, even with all the developments to make the run faster, it's still a massive gamble if the run is completed or not. Our first route was a gamble with using Setzer's Joker Doom. Part of our second route gambled with a coin flip to engulf our party, and now we end up with a dice roll, hoping to land on the perfect frame needed to end the game. The journey to beat Final Fantasy VI in 31 minutes was one spanning more than a decade. Most of it wasn't just a grind for a top time though, it was an effort to discover new ways for a community to complete one of their favorite games. While each of these times achieved are important, it's even more important to know the work put into each record. In these runs, there's likely to be several phases attached to every improvement, with the road paved thanks to an incredible amount of effort from those in the shadows. So whenever you're watching a speedrun of your favorite game, take a moment to look up who actually made that run possible. Who knows? You may end up learning something incredible, or you might lose all your money in a casino. Stay hydrated, folks, and thanks for watching.